HP Lion Pride PT4. The sunlight warmed him, though it hurt his eyes. He knew he was in his bed, and that it must be afternoon, because the sun didn't shine into his room until late in the day. He took several deep breaths, feeling for any pain. All he felt was a bit of stiffness, but nothing worse than that. In fact, he was a bit puzzled to feel a bit stronger than he could ever remember. There was something else as well. Something weighing him down. Very slowly, Harry opened his eyes, blinking in the brilliant sunlight. He tried to sit up fully, but whatever was on him, prevented him from moving too much. Harry was able to move his right arm, which he took advantage of to retrieve his glasses from the bedside table. Once he could see clearly, Harry found that what was keeping him down was nothing less than Daphne, sleeping on top of his blankets, her arm draped over his middle, her dark shining hair covering her beautiful face. "Daphne," he said hoarsely. His throat was terribly dry. He desperately wanted a drink, but first he had to get out of bed. He gently reached out and began shaking his girlfriend to wake her. "Come on, beautiful, it's time to wake up." Daphne gave a soft groan. "No wanna." She tightened her hold on him a bit, as she snuggled into his chest further. Harry couldn't help but smile at her protestations. "Come on, I really need to get up." "What?" Daphne muttered, slowly lifting her head. Her dark hair hung in her face, which she brushed aside in annoyance, her eyes widening in realization when her brain seemed to start functioning properly. Harry noticed that her eyes looked a bit bloodshot, almost as if she'd been crying at some point. "Harry." Yeah." Harry gave a soft smile. "Whose bed did you think you were in? Oh my gods, you're finally awake." She sat up and pulled him into a tight embrace. "I've been so scared and worried." "We all have. Dumbledore was so frightened that he'd messed everything up." "How long have I been out?" Harry asked curiously. 3 days. Dumbledore said if you didn't wake up today, he was going to risk bringing a healer to take a look at you." Daphne smiled, her dark eyes brimming with happy tears. Harry reached up to wipe them away, which caused his girlfriend to smile brightly. She clutched his hand, which he pressed against her cheek, sighing in contentment at the feel of his hand on her skin. "She hasn't left your side. We've had a terrible time just getting her to eat." Sirius was leaning in the doorway, smiling happily at his godson. Harry was struck at how calm his godfather looked in that pose, even though Harry could see the relief in Sirius' eyes plainly. "You gave us all a bit of a fright, kiddo. How are you feeling?" "Okay, I think. I can't really remember what happened." Harry frowned. "Get dressed, we'll fill you in over dinner." Sirius nodded. "Come on, Daphne, give the boy a bit of privacy." "But..." Daphne began to protest, but Harry cut her off. "I'm fine. I'll only be a minute," Harry whispered, his voice still hoarse. Daphne looked at him for a long moment, before nodding and slowly sliding off his bed. Harry watched her back out of his bedroom, looking as if she was worried he might simply vanish from existence. Sirius grinned as he shut the door, allowing Harry to get out of bed and get dressed in private. Harry felt stiff. His muscles felt tired and weak, almost as if he'd been immobile for years. As he dressed himself, and moved about, the stiffness lessened. He wanted to take a shower, but the noise coming from his stomach made it clear that food was his top priority. A few moments later, Harry was opening his door, only to be engulfed by his girlfriend once again. "You're acting like I died and came back," Harry joked. His smile faded away when he saw the look on Daphne's face. He was filled with a wave of anxiety as Daphne's face darkened. "You very nearly did." Dumbledore had arrived that night as he had promised Harry he would. With a swish of his wand, he removed all the furniture from the sitting room except for one of the sofas, which he beckoned Harry to lay upon. Harry was glad that Dumbledore had not excused the others, but instead asked them all to stay. Dumbledore reached into his robes and retrieved what appeared to be an ordinary goblet. Harry thought it was similar to one of those he'd used so often at Hogwarts. And yet, there was something off about this rather benign object. Something foreboding. Harry looked to the headmaster, preparing to ask about it, but the headmaster didn't give him the opportunity. "I am sorry, Harry, but I think this will be quite painful. I would ask that you try to think of something pleasant and focus on it with all your might," Dumbledore said quite sadly. He took his wand, and aimed it at Harry's heart. Harry felt his pulse quicken, and he saw a look of utter revulsion on the headmaster's face. "What are you doing?" Daphne asked, worry evident on her face. Harry looked over to her, and tried to give her an encouraging look, but his heart was now racing, and he was feeling entirely too nervous. Dumbledore had not explained how they would be getting the soul fragment out of him, and had also warned him not to speak about it to his friends. "Please, Miss Greengrass, remain where you are. It is very important that you all remain on that side of the room." Dumbledore looked at Harry's friends pointedly before turning back to Harry. Dumbledore took a deep breath, and closed his eyes. The headmaster began mumbling, and Harry tried to make out what Dumbledore was saying, but it was far too soft, and the crackling of the fire drowned out most of it. The room became deathly quiet, and Harry lay back to try and relax as he'd been told to. He looked over at Daphne again, who was watching him carefully, worry reflected in her dark eyes. Harry felt himself relaxing as he looked at all his friends. He began to think how lucky he was being here with them all in this wonderful house on the beach, when suddenly everything changed. The pain was indescribable. The torture curse had nothing on what Harry felt. His joints all locked, and his back arched up so much, that Harry thought he would crush his own spine to dust. Fire was coursing through his veins, and his jaw was clenched so tightly, Harry was sure he heard teeth cracking under the pressure. The worst was the pain in his skull. It felt as if his head were only a moment from exploding. All the while, there was a constant terrible, gut-wrenching scream, that Harry was sure not his own. Daphne lunged towards Harry, but was held back by Sirius, who looked just as frightened as she felt. He wrapped his arms around the girl, as she fought to get free, and kept repeating to wait. "Let me go," she screamed. "Stay back," Dumbledore warned again. Daphne fought against Sirius's grip as she watched Harry writhe in agony. Blood began to spill out of his nose and scar, and a horrible scream began in his throat and erupted out of his mouth, causing Hermione to hold her hands over her ears. She turned away from the scene, and hid her face in Neville's chest. Neville wrapped his arms protectively around his girlfriend, but could not tear his eyes away from Harry's writhing form. Strange wounds began to on up all over Harry's body, blood staining his clothing. Neville began to step forward unconsciously, when Remus threw out an arm to stop him. Dumbledore looked horrible as he continued to mumble. It appeared to the onlookers as if he were now fighting something. His wand began to shake, and the old man grasped hold of it with both hands. "What is he doing?" Tracy whispered, tears falling from her eyes as she could only look between Harry and Daphne, who was fighting hard against Sirius to get to Harry. Remus had now stepped forward to help his friend restrain the young witch. Suddenly there was a scream that was unlike anything any of them had ever heard, and something that looked like black smoke came out of Harry's chest. Around them, windows began to crack, and things fell from the walls. The very house was shaking, and they all felt a deep fear as they watched Dumbledore manipulate this apparition that had risen out of Harry's chest. Daphne stopped struggling, frozen in fearful wonder as Dumbledore looked to be fighting against this spectre, guiding it with his wand into the goblet. The old man was grimacing, and sweating as he waved his wand in several intricate patterns. The goblet began to glow with a sinister-looking red light, and the scream ended, and everything fell silent once again. Dumbledore collapsed to his knees, and Remus ran past the group to see to the headmaster. "Give me a moment." Dumbledore sighed. "See to Harry, please." "He's unconscious," Sirius said. He had leapt to Harry's side, Daphne close beside him. Sirius began doing his best to mend all of the open cuts on Harry's body, while Remus rushed to fetch some potions for the boy. "What did you do to him?" Daphne asked scathingly, glaring at the headmaster, who was now climbing to his feet once again, looking very worn down. "I have freed him." Dumbledore sighed. "Please step back from him, so that I may see if he is indeed all right." Sirius pulled a very distraught and angry Daphne away again, as Dumbledore bent over the now limp form of his godson. Daphne now had tears streaming from her eyes, as she reached out to try and get to Harry. Dumbledore moved his wand over Harry's body several times, watching with great interest as his wand glowed with a faint yellow light. He cast several advanced healing spells, and suggested several restorative drafts to be used later. Finally, Dumbledore rose to his feet again, and levitated Harry's body up the stairs and into his bedroom. "You still haven't told us what you did to him?" Daphne asked, her voice low and dangerous. She was waiting at the foot of the steps as the headmaster returned. Her fists were balled up at her sides, and Dumbledore actually felt a twinge of fear as he stared into her cold dark eyes. He had to smile at the girl, as he could now clearly see the depth of her feelings for the young man on whom so much rested. "I assure you, he is going to be quite all right. If you calm yourself, I will explain everything to you all." "Let's hear what he has to say," Tracy said, pulling Daphne back into the sitting room. Daphne kept her gaze locked on the old man as he followed the two girls into the sitting room that had been restored to its normal look. Dumbledore went to the hearth, and took the gold goblet and set it on the small table in the middle of the two sofas, before sitting in the soft armchair at the end. The goblet seemed to be shaking ever so slightly. If they all hadn't been watching it so intently, they would have missed it entirely. They could all feel revulsion just looking at it, but none of them understood the reason why. "Professor, what was all that? What did you put in there?" Hermione asked, wiping her teary eyes. "What was that came out of Harry?" "That, Miss Granger, was a piece of Lord Voldemort's soul." There was a collective gasp, and Dumbledore noted that they all looked horror-stricken by his statement. Before they could ask any questions, the ancient headmaster launched into a very long explanation on how Harry had come to possess a piece of the Dark Lord's soul within himself, and how he'd been totally unaware of it for all these years. So that's how Harry is able to see what Voldemort is doing, Sirius remarked, looking at the goblet. That was their connection. Dumbledore nodded. Why would anyone split their soul apart? Neville wondered aloud. How is it even possible in the first place? I mean, where is your soul even located? Tracy asked, feeling terribly confused and overwhelmed. It is quite easy to split one's soul, Dumbledore said softly. Too easy, in fact. It takes an act of greatest evil. Can any of you guess what might be the most evil act a person can partake in? Killing someone, Neville said almost inaudibly. In his mind he saw Bellatrix Lestrange and how he'd shoved her own dagger deep into her shriveled black heart, taking her life from her once and for all. Yes, and no. Killing someone will most definitely affect you, but it won't necessarily split your soul. Murder, on the other hand, will do irrevocable damage to your soul. You see, there is a fine distinction between killing someone in defense of yourself, or as an accident, and taking one's life for other purposes. Killing out of jealousy, or greed, or rage. So, Mr. Longbottom, you should not worry too much about your own soul. I believe that while you initially sought vengeance for what happened to your mother and father, I do not believe you would have killed Bellatrix Lestrange in cold blood, Dumbledore said. Neville looked up, his eyes distant and sad. He had been privately struggling with his own guilt over the incident. He knew that it was nothing less than the psychotic woman deserved, but had he truly been in the right to end her life? Who was he to play judge, jury, and executioner? Hermione pulled him closer to her, wrapping her arms comfortingly around his shoulders, placing a soft kiss at his temple. I told you, you could talk to me about that, she sighed. I know. It's just difficult. And this is why I do not fear for you. Dumbledore smiled softly. The guilt over taking the life of another person, even one as sick and depraved as Bellatrix was, is proof that your soul is intact. It is the deepest hope in my heart that you will never find yourself in a situation where you have no other choice. I am sure that you will all have to do what is needed to survive this war, Dumbledore said sadly, his usually twinkling eyes darkening a bit. But why would Voldemort want to split his soul? Tracy asked, trying to steer the conversation back to the original topic. She was sure she wasn't going to like this line of conversation anymore, but it was better than having to imagine killing people except maybe Malfoy. To make this, Dumbledore motioned to the goblet. A Horcrux. No. Sirius said in shock, staring with wide eyes at the goblet. He actually made one of those disgusting things. I thought they were just something made up in a book. A sick joke. I am afraid they are quite real, and Lord Voldemort has made at least 6. I have made his 7th here tonight. One which I intend to destroy this very evening, with your help. How do you know what it is? Hermione asked Sirius, who was unable to look away from the goblet. I've told you on several occasions that the Black family is less than reputable, Hermione. Our library was filled to bursting with all manner of dark arts books. I read about Horcruxes when I was younger than you all. I don't understand, Daphne said, looking at the goblet, which she swore had begun shaking a bit more. Indeed, she noticed it was not where Dumbledore had originally placed it. Dumbledore then explained what exactly the purpose of a Horcrux was, and how he had learned of the existence of Voldemort's Horcruxes. The 4 teens and the 2 men listened intently, all looking thoroughly sickened by what they heard. You said some of them had been destroyed? Sirius asked, and Dumbledore nodded. It was Harry who discovered and destroyed the first one, though at the time he was unaware of what it was he'd truly accomplished. Even I was not certain of it, though I suspected. The diary! Hermione shouted. Very well done, Miss Granger. Were we in school, I would have awarded 10 points to you. Dumbledore smiled. You are correct. The diary that possessed Miss Weasley in her first year, was indeed a Horcrux. When it was brought to me, I suspected what it might have been, and during that summer, I began my research into the subject. I have spent the last 2 years diligently trying to find any clue as to where the rest of them are. Exactly how many of them are there? Neville asked, a look of determination on his face. I am not completely sure, though I believe that there are no more than 7 in all. 2 of them have been destroyed, and after tonight, that number will be 3. It is my intent to seek out and destroy the remaining Horcruxes before Harry has to face Lord Voldemort. It is also my intention to give Harry the tools he needs to put up a good fight. I cannot guarantee the outcome, but I feel, with the 4 of you at his side, Harry will win this war for all of us. Wait a minute. Remus piped up. If Harry was already a Horcrux, why did you make a new one? Harry was not a Horcrux, he was simply a vessel for a very weak portion of Lord Voldemort's soul. Dumbledore said reassuringly. Had he in fact been a Horcrux, he would not have been Harry, but Lord Voldemort, himself. As we have just established, Miss Weasley was in possession of a Horcrux in her first year. The soul that resided inside possessed her, gaining in strength as it absorbed her essence. In effect, it was trying to take her over. Had Harry actually been a Horcrux, that piece of Voldemort's soul would have taken over Harry long ago. He looked at them all to make sure they were following his explanation. That fragment of soul that resided in Harry had many years in which to take him over. The soul fragment was far too weak to actually do that. All it could do was to anchor itself to him. As Harry grew up, that soul fragment gained strength, though it was still far too small, and weak to do much more than to hinder Harry's magic. Nor did it have any of the enchantments a Horcrux would have provided it to help assert itself over Harry. You see, an item that is to become a Horcrux must first be made ready through a ritual, one that needs to be done before you are able to place a piece of your soul inside. As Harry was never put through that ritual, he merely played host to that. Dumbledore indicated the goblet again. Living beings are not typically used as Horcruxes, as they are quite volatile. You would not want to place your soul inside another living being, as their soul would be constantly at war with your fragmented soul, though in the end, it is likely you would go quite mad. And the Horcrux might take over. This, of course, just conjecture. Also, if that being were killed, your Horcrux would die with it. You said it hindered Harry's magic, Sirius remarked. Are you saying Harry's a lot stronger than we think? Sirius asked curiously. I think it is a distinct possibility. He has mastered charms and spells far beyond his years, and I believe that given time and proper training he quite a cunning and powerful opponent to Lord Voldemort. With this connection now broken fully, the Dark Lord will be unable to see into Harry's mind, and will be at a great disadvantage in the future. He will be quite clueless as to Harry's full potential. But he always has trouble learning new spells. Hermione pointed out. Sometimes it takes him forever to get the hang of new spells. But when he does get them, they're always better than most others. Neville pointed out. There's no denying that you're usually the first to get a new spell, but when Harry does, he does kind of beat you, in a way. Hermione looked like she was going to be upset, but her anger melted away as she realized what Neville was saying. More often than not, Harry's spell work was a bit better than hers, though he struggled to work new spells. Magic works in mysterious way, Miss Granger, but we do know that our power is focused through our wands by out intent. An organized mind such as yours, will undoubtedly be able to focus their intent much easier, thereby accomplishing new spells quicker. Though it will still take time to get that spell up to its full potential, as it takes time to focus one's power along with the intent. With others, they might have a much easier time focusing their magic. They will be unable to accomplish the spell, because they can't concentrate on the intent, and their magic will of course, have some rather interesting results. I suspect that Harry will have a much easier time, as I believe he has always been able to focus his intent. I believe that the soul fragment continually block his magic, so Harry would have to try much harder, thus getting great results, when he was finally able to tap into his magic. Silence fell for a moment, as they all tried to process everything they had seen and heard. How do we destroy them? Daphne asked, her tone stoic and determined. I am glad you asked that, as it is getting to be very late, and tonight's events have exhausted me. Let us take this outside, as it will be most eventful. As one, they all rose, and Dumbledore took the goblet in his hands, and led them all outside into the warm night. Dumbledore noticed how violently the cup was shaking, and knew that it must be aware of its imminent destruction. They walked until they were on the beach, and a good way away from the house. I shall ask you all to light your wands, Dumbledore said, using his own wand to drag a large stone over to him, and placing the goblet upon it. Once again he reached into his robes and pulled a long shimmering sword from underneath. That's Gryffindor's sword, Neville said, pointing in awe at the shining blade. You are correct. I have found it most effective for this task. Now if you would all take a step or two back, but please keep your wands lit. Daphne saw that the goblet had fallen on its side and was shaking quite noticeably now. Dumbledore raised the sword, and drove it down into the goblet quite forcefully. There was a blast that knocked them all off their feet, and that unearthly scream they all heard early echoed and faded away. Slowly, they all began to get to their feet again. Is that it? Tracy asked, looking around fearfully, as if she expected something else to happen. Perhaps the fragmented soul would try to find a new home within her. It is, Dumbledore said, pointing to the now mangled, and smoking goblet. There was a thick, black liquid oozing from the hole made by the glimmering sword in Dumbledore's hand. Dumbledore replaced the sword within his robes, and gingerly picked up the now destroyed Horcrux. I think that is more than enough for this evening. I shall return tomorrow evening to look in on young Harry. With a soft bow, Dumbledore disappeared, leaving Daphne and the others staring at the now blackened stone in awe. He's been in to see you every day since. Remus concluded the story, and Harry gave a great sigh. He felt such relief that they all now knew of the Horcruxes, and that he had unwittingly been a vessel for so long. He looked up at his friends and smiled at their concern. I feel fine. In fact, I don't know that I've ever felt this good, he said, and Daphne gave his hand a squeeze. Harry leaned towards her, and she rested her head on his shoulders. Dumbledore said that your magic was helping the potions and stuff help you to heal faster. He was really impressed. Neville remarked with a grin. That doesn't give you license to go getting yourself hurt all year with Quidditch and whatever else you get up to, Sirius said with faux sternness. We've all be so worried about you. Hermione smiled softly. When you weren't awake the next day, Dumbledore thought he might have done something wrong. He kept checking you, trying to find something out of place. But it seems all you needed was rest, Dumbledore said happily as he entered the dining room where they had all just finished dinner. It is very good to see you again, Harry. It's good to see you, sir, and thank you for everything. It was nothing. They all needed to know what we're up against. I didn't want you to tell them, as it was quite complex, and I wished for them to understand fully. Not that I am concerned about your ability to convey the facts. Harry waved it away. I understand what you're trying to say, sir. Well, as I only came to look in on you, and I am pleased to find you up and about, I should be on my way. I still have much to do in preparation for the coming year. Harry, I would ask that if you feel any effects from our, for lack of a better word, exorcism, please notify me immediately. I will. Harry nodded. Are you sure you won't stay, Albus? Sirius asked. Maybe have a brandy, or something. A very tempting offer, but as I said, I still have much to do. Harry, I will be back in 2 weeks for our first lesson. I'll be ready. Harry promised, and with a polite bow, Dumbledore swept from the room. I don't know how good you're going to feel tomorrow, Remus said, looking pointedly at Sirius, whose face suddenly darkened. What do you mean? Harry asked. Snape is coming tomorrow for his first lesson with you all. Harry was not going to rest up. The very next morning he was up and running with his friends, as they dodged and wove their way through the ever-growing complexity of Mad-Eye Moody's obstacle course. They were still not allowed to retaliate during the course, but Moody continued to promise that once they made the 2-mile course in under 15 minutes, he would then allow them their wands during the course. Tonks arrived that afternoon to work them through their spell work. They had progressed far enough that Tonks was taking it in turns to duel them one-on-one. So far, none of them had beaten her, but this afternoon, she was in for a surprise. All right, Harry, I think it's time you and I tangled horns again. Remember, non-lethal spells, and only silent casting. I hear a peep from you, and I'll make what I did to Neville look like a love hex. Neville paled, and unconsciously rubbed his left buttock. Hermione giggled and nudged him playfully, causing the boy to blush crimson. Sirius and Remus had both come out to watch, and stood in silent observation as Harry and Tonks began to circle. Tonks struck first, her wand flashing forward, sending a brilliant flash of red at Harry, who rolled to the right to avoid it. He was on his feet, and casting in an instant. Tonks barely got her shield up as 3 stunners soared at her head. The force of the spells caught Tonks off guard. She couldn't remember the last time she felt stunners this powerful. The 3rd stunner shattered her shield altogether, and she had to sidestep what she thought was a levitating charm. Tonks retaliated with a series of tripping jinxes, but Harry easily dodged them. Harry moved quite quickly, and Tonks had to admit that Moody's physical training was starting to really shine through in all of them. All of the teens were moving far more than simply relying on shield charms. Harry cast a blasting hex at Tonks' feet, making the metamorph jump in surprise. Her attention distracted with trying to avoid being blown apart, she nearly fell to another stunner. Tonks cursed herself, and decided that Harry was getting a bit cocky. The Auror felt it was time to take the chosen one down a peg, but just as she was about to put her plan into action, she felt as if she'd been hit by a truck. Harry had no idea why he thought of it, but he had followed his instincts, and it had gained him a victory. He aimed his wand at Tonks, and blinded her with a Lumos spell, though he tried to make it very powerful. As Tonks stumbled, he sent a bludgeoning hex at her, and knocked her off her feet, before securing her with magical ropes, and picking up her wand off the ground. "Dora!" Remus called out, and the others all rushed over to see if she were all right. "It'll be all right, so long as someone gets me out of these ropes right away," Tonks said, stinging from her loss. She had not been prepared for any of these youngsters to be able to take her just yet, though she had been going fairly easy on them. Remus removed the ropes with a finite, and helped H to her feet. Harry handed her back her wand with a rather sheepish smile. Tonks couldn't remain angry at him. The point of all this was to make them strong, and to be able to defeat their enemies. Harry had done that. The fact that he looked almost apologetic rather than smug helped to ebb her anger. "All right, you lot. It's clear you've got the simple stuff done. I think it's time we moved on to some more difficult stuff." The rest of the afternoon, Tonks began to show them some new spells to conceal themselves. The group ended making a game of hide and seek using disillusionment charms. At 7 that night, Snape arrived, looking just as dour and sinister as ever. The moment he laid eyes on them all, his sneer appeared on his sallow face, and when he spoke, his tone was nothing less than annoyed. "I have been asked to instruct you in some more common dark spells. This is to supposedly give you an advantage in a fight with Death Eaters. Most of which I will show you is very advanced magic, and I am doubtful that you will ever accomplish it." He stared coldly at Neville, who for the first time, did not cower under the old bat's gaze. Instead, Neville looked like he was ready to take on the challenge. "Maybe if you were a decent teacher, and truly took time to instruct us, we might surprise you." The other 14s turned as one, all staring open-mouthed at Neville, who was satering coldly at Snape, who looked as if he'd just been hit over the head. "What did you say?" Snape asked, his tone cold and threatening. "I think you heard me quite clearly, Sir," Neville said, his eyes narrowing. "Perhaps if you took time to truly instruct us, we might actually be able to learn what you have to teach. Or is that you truly don't know how to teach? Maybe that's why you've never been given the defense job. I will not be spoken to in such a manner, especially not by a squib." "We're not in class," Sir Neville said, taking a step forward, drawing his wand in the process. "And I am no squib. I've done things I never thought I was capable of, and I will no longer allow people like you to try and tear away my self-confidence." Snape's anger melted away a little too quickly for Harry's liking, and he wanted to warn Neville to calm down, but Snape spoke up quickly. "So, you think you've gained a bit of power? You think yourself ready to face a truly powerful Death Eater? Well then, perhaps we should see what it is Neville Longbottom can truly do." Snape's wand was out in a flash, and Neville was very nearly hit with a sickening yellow curse. Neville only just ducked, flicking his own wand at the teacher who had beaten him down for so long. The others all retrieved their wands, but Snape warned them against helping Neville out. Harry looked to Hermione, who was watching the duel anxiously. Harry knew, as did the others, that Snape was simply toying with Neville. The curses he was throwing were child's play to the former Death Eater, and Harry knew it, as did the others, but Neville was blinded by his own anger to see it. To his friends' collective surprise, Neville actually held up pretty well against Snape. He dodged almost everything thrown at him, and was able to conjure up shields when he couldn't. Unfortunately, he was never given a chance to fight back, and was kept on the defensive. Yet, through it all, Neville was actually smiling. Snape was just as surprised as Neville's friends, though he masked it well. He realized as he kept Neville moving and dodging, that by the end of the summer, if he kept working as hard as he'd been hearing the teens were, Neville might actually manage to fire off a few offensive spells, and given how deep Neville's hat of him quite logically ran, Snape shivered to think what the boy might actually hit him with. Especially given the nature of what he was supposed to teach them. Snape finally managed to trip Neville, and throw a full body bind on him. Yet, Neville didn't whine, as Snape expected. He was actually smiling when he had been freed. He seemed more than pleased with himself, and Snape inwardly groaned. As if this group wasn't already so full of themselves. Snape managed to show them 2 new spells after his duel with Neville, a cutting curse that some of his former Death Eater compatriots favored in the First War, and rather nasty bone-crushing hex. Snape shivered at the thought of Neville using it on him, as the boy had a very wicked glint in his eye the rest of the evening. You are to practice these spells every night. I shall return in a week, Snape said at the end of their lesson. And the next time you think you can match me, Longbottom, you'd better be able to do more than dance prettily. He sneered, knowing in his heart that it was very likely the boy would do just that. The house seemed empty, except for the laughter that could be heard throughout every room. The laughter came from the courtyard which the house was built around, where 5 teens were learning the meaning of trust and teamwork at the hands of their pink-haired tutor. As 2 men stood in the open double doors, chuckling as their young charges laughed, and enjoyed themselves at the sheer silliness of their exercises. In the sitting room, the flue flared up, and Amelia Bones' shouts carried out through the Flamel house. Remus, with his heightened sense of hearing, was the first to respond, with Sirius following hot on his friend's heels. They had truly hated to tear themselves away from watching Tonks run the teens through their team-building exercises, as the Auror had thought that the kids would truly enjoy an afternoon of fun. While they had enjoyed watch all the kids, both men were focused mostly on Harry, the one link they had to James and Lily Potter, 2 people who had meant so much to them. And had been taken away far too soon. Remus Lupin and Sirius Black had carried on a rather hushed conversation, both commenting on how truly good it was to see the young man, who had suffered so much, and had never really known innocence as any other child, to be acting his age. Harry and his girlfriend were almost constantly smiling, and laughing. Harry joked with Daphne, Neville, Hermione, and Tracy, and even got into a few wrestling matches with Neville, or Daphne, the later of which he lost badly. The insistent and rather harried voice of their new leader tore them away from enjoying the teens being just what they were, kids. Upon seeing Amelia's face, both men realized that if she were contacting them, something big was about to happen. Amelia, what's going on? Remus asked. I need you both, and Tonks to join us at headquarters right away. We've gotten some information about a Death Eater raid, and we're going to try and stop it. I'll go let the kids know, and get Tonks, Remus said, rising to his feet. Sirius nodded. Will I be participating? Sirius began, but Amelia cut him off. Yes. I also have a few matters to discuss with you, but they'll have to wait. Sirius, listen to me carefully. If Pettigrew is there tonight, I need you to put aside your personal feelings, and take him alive. Are we clear? Sirius nodded his understanding, though his eyes burned with hatred for the fat man who'd been the cause of Harry's parents' deaths. Unfortunately, he was also the only way he could be completely cleared. Amelia had explained that she could not pardon him and be done with it. The Wizengamot would overrule her decision in the first place, and secondly, the whole of the wizarding world needed to know beyond any doubt that it had not been Sirius who had betrayed James and Lily. "Stand back, Amelia," Remus said as he and Tonks returned to the sitting room, with Harry and the others right behind. Remus was the first to step into the flames, calling out his destination. Tonks followed, leaving Sirius to give the teens some last-minute instruction. "Hopefully we won't be too late tonight. I'm trusting all of you to behave." He gave a pointed look to Harry and Daphne in particular. "Stay in the house, please. And keep on your guard. We're unplottable, and under the Fidelius charm, but you can't be too careful. Stay safe," Harry said, a bit of resentment in his tone. Sirius knew that Harry likely wanted to come along and help in the fight. Sirius could see clearly that the other teens felt the same about being forced to stay behind. Given how hard they had been training, he understood their resentment. Sirius clasped Harry's shoulder, and his face softened. "Soon enough you'll all have to fight, but it's not your time just yet. Everyone is aware how capable you are, no one is doubting that. We just want to protect you as long as we can. So, as much as you hate it, try to be understanding." Harry nodded solemnly, and Sirius patted his shoulder before he followed Remus and Tonks through the fireplace. Upon arriving at the Black family home, Sirius could not help be a bit overwhelmed. He had never seen it so full of Order members. Ever since Amelia had taken over leadership, their numbers had swelled. It was impressive how well she balanced her public face as the interim Minister of Magic, and the head of a vigilante force. Sirius wondered not for the first time if it was her tough stance against the Death Eaters that made people want to fight with her, as opposed to Dumbledore's rather soft outlook. Sirius was pulled from his thoughts as Amelia called the meeting to order. "Now that everyone is here, we can begin," Amelia Bones said loudly, silencing the gathered. "Severus has provided us with information on 3 potential attacks for tonight. Severus, if you would." Snape rose from his chair and took a long breath. Sirius noticed how tired his school rival looked. As much as he truly hated Snape, he respected the man for putting his life on the line to bring them the information that would hopefully save more than a few lives. At the same time, a very childish part of Sirius wondered how truly loyal to the Order Snape actually was. The Dark Lord is frustrated. His inability to be rid of the Potter boy is becoming something more than obsession. I think that he feels that there are many who do not recognize his immense power. That, I believe, is why he is planning to attack 3 targets tonight. Or rather, his followers are going to attack 3 targets. 2 are Muggle communities, where some wizarding families reside. He is targeting Muggleborns, as we all expected. These attacks are only distractions, I think. The 3rd attack is to be on Diagon Alley. He is sending Rodolphus Lestrange to lead this operation, and I do not know the purpose. Severus, do you have any theories? Dumbledore asked from Amelia's left. Snape bowed his head wearily and gave a great sigh. I do. The Dark Lord has become obsessed with wand lore. I think he may be planning to abduct Ollivander. There were murmurs throughout the kitchen, where the meeting was taking place, and Sirius felt the same thing he was sure they all felt. Confusion. Amelia stood up, and thanked Snape for the report before silencing everyone so she could give out orders. As you can all guess, I do not plan to let Voldemort accomplish his plans. There was a small wave of shivering as the minister spoke the name. Sirius noticed it was far smaller than what he was used to seeing, and hoped that this might be a change that caught on. If fewer and fewer people feared the name, possibly more people would stand against him, and the war would end sooner. We are going to split into 3 groups, and stop each of these attacks, and we have very little time in which to move. Bill and Arthur Weasley have been making emergency port keys for everyone, in case you are incapacitated. They will bring you right back here where healers will be waiting. There were some murmurings, but Amelia cleared her throat, getting their attentions again. If you can take prisoners, do so. There will be Aurors in each group, who will take charge of prisoners. However, if you do not believe you'll be able to subdue any Death Eaters, then don't hesitate. I must caution all of you. We are looking to take Peter Pettigrew into custody, so if you see him, do not kill him. He must be taken alive, are we clear? Everyone nodded, and Amelia gave a soft smile. She then began assigning people to one of the 3 groups, being led by Mad-Eye Moody, Kingsley Shacklebolt, and herself. She made a point to put Sirius in her group as her partner, which Sirius found intriguing. 15 minutes later, disguised as a married couple doing some late shopping, Sirius and Amelia strode down Diagon Alley. Amelia had done a fine job with glamour charms to disguise Sirius and herself. Sirius now had close-cropped auburn hair and beard. His tattoos were all gone, and Remus had even commented how respectable his friend looked. Amelia had replaced her monocle with a pair of dark-rimmed glasses, and her hair was now bright blonde. They walked down the alley, hand in hand, looking for all the world as a carefree couple, browsing shops and stalls. Sirius could not stop grinning, as he was so thrilled to be out and about in the world, not to mention the anticipation of some real action. When you said I'd be your partner for the evening, I had thought you meant I'd be backing you up. If you'd wanted to hold hands, all you had to do was ask me. Ever the charmer. Amelia chuckled, her eyes scanning the passing people for any known Death Eaters. You know, I never forgot how you tried to ask me out in your 2nd year. What could I say? You were every boy's daydream back then. I had to try and get your attentions, even if you were a 7th year. I thought I might have a real shot as you were a Hufflepuff. Sirius replied. Perhaps soaking me with a water balloon wasn't the best way to get my attentions. I agree, it wasn't very well thought out. Sirius grinned. But what do you expect from a 12-year-old? I did get much better at getting the attentions of the opposite sex. So I've heard. Amelia commented, pretending to be interested in a display of robes in a window. You gained quite a reputation for your exploits during your school years, not to mention how you handled yourself in Auror training. It's a shame that you lost your head and went after Pettigrew. You'd have made one hell of an Auror. James was family. Sirius responded. Would you have thought clearly in that same situation? Besides, once we get that rat, everyone will know that I really am innocent. Amelia turned to look at him, with a wry smile on her face. She playfully patted his cheek as she spoke. They'll know that you're not guilty of betraying your friends, or killing those muggles. But you're far from innocent, and we both know that. Are you flirting with me? Sirius asked, taken aback, and actually enjoying the banter with Amelia. Ollivander has a customer. The minister pointed out, changing the subject. Dejected, Sirius glanced over his shoulder, and saw that indeed 2 men had entered the shop. He also saw 2 more men standing up the street a bit, one of whom, he recognized. That's Avery, Sirius said. Amelia followed his gaze and saw the Death Eater, trying to look as inconspicuous as she and Sirius were trying to be. Did you see who went into the shop? She asked, and Sirius had to shake his head. Think we should take a look? Sirius asked. Amelia thought for just a second before nodding. Together they drew their wands and marched towards the wand shop. Just as they reached the door, chaos exploded around them. Screams erupted as several curses flew through the air, smashing into buildings, and blowing craters in the street. All around Sirius and Amelia, people began running in all directions. The flurry of movement made it difficult to see where the spells were coming from. They were forced to take cover behind a large sign for a sale on potion supplies. This isn't going to hold very long, Sirius remarked. We need to get inside the shop, before they get away, Amelia shouted over the noise. Sirius didn't hesitate. He was moving as fast as he could right towards Ollivander's shop, kicking the door down. Both he and Madame Bones stormed inside to find themselves ducking out of the path of 2 killing curses. Please help! Ollivander cried out. There was a soft thud, and Sirius chanced a peek over the counter to see the old man doubled over, while a man he didn't recognize stood over him. The other man aimed his wand at the counter, and Sirius ducked just in time to avoid a blasting hex. The counter erupted in splinters. Greetings, Rudolphus, Sirius called out. Been a long time. Sorry to hear about your wife's passing. Who are you? Rudolphus Lestrange asked angrily. He had once been a very suave and handsome individual. He, not unlike Lucius Malfoy, had been very well thought of in the wizarding world, thanks to his family name, and the large amounts of gold he used to get his way. However, the years in Azkaban had robbed him of his looks, and the Wizengamot had seized all his family assets upon his conviction. He was a rather imposing figure, despite his long years in prison. His once luscious mane of midnight black hair now hung in graying thin strands in front of his gaunt face. His eyes were sunken, much as Sirius' own had been, though Rudolphus were filled with murderous anger. Sirius remembered Dumbledore bringing Neville to the Flamel House, and explaining Rudolphus' vendetta against He-Boy. Is that Black? Sirius Black? Well, what a surprise. Dumbledore finally let you off the chain, then. And who's that with you? Another blood traitor, or just some mudblood trollop? You're not getting out of here alive, Sirius shouted, trying to position himself for a strike. He was sure that Rudolphus was just waiting for him to peek out again. Sirius knew he and Amelia were pinned down where they were. Fortunately, the Death Eaters only had one way out of the shop, and it meant coming past them. It's not too late, Black. The Dark Lord would welcome you, Black. The world is about to change, are you sure you want to be on the losing side? Keep him talking. Amelia whispered. Sirius saw that she had gotten her feet under her, and was edging along the counter, trying to get a good look at their adversaries. Sirius guessed that the other members of the Order were still locked in combat with the Death Eaters if the explosions and screams were any indication. "I don't think so," Sirius remarked. "I understand the health plan is shite." Reducto. Sirius ducked down, and felt Amelia flatten herself on the floor as more of the counter disintegrated. Sirius took advantage and sent a couple of stunners around the corner. He heard one of the men give a grimace, and wondered if he'd managed to hit him. "Clown shoes, black. Why not try and aim?" Rudolphus taunted. "If you let us get out of here, I promise to kill you quickly." "Not much incentive for us." Amelia jumped up and fired a wave of spells, causing Rudolphus and his partner to scramble for cover. Sirius leaned around the corner, and thinking quickly, summoned Ollivander to him. The old man, looking quite surprised to find himself sliding across the floor. "No!" Rudolphus screamed, and fired a cutting curse at Sirius, who scrambled back around the corner. He heard the old man crash on the other side of the counter, and could hear him whimper. Two more curses slammed into the floor right next to him, and Sirius had to scramble back. "I almost had him," Sirius said to Amelia. "On 2. Amelia said, and she counted down. She shot up, firing off spells towards the shelves of wands, where the Death Eaters took cover. Sirius took aim, and with a shout of Diffindo, was rewarded with a shout of pain, and the sight of Rudolphus Buddy's hand being ripped up. "Hey Rudy! My aim seems to be improving," Sirius shouted merrily. The man stumbled stupidly on his feet, in shock of what had just happened, which allowed for Amelia to stun the man. Both of them took cover again as Rudolphus came out from behind his hiding spot, firing a volley of very nasty spells. They could hear him coming closer, and Sirius knew he had to act if they were going to get the old wand maker out of there. Sirius jumped up and over the counter, hoping to surprise the Death Eater, but was hit in the face with a revulsion jinx, which launched him right through the storefront window and back into the alley. He landed hard on the cobblestone street, his back screaming in agony. He noticed that the alley was much quieter than it had been moments before, and he heard shouts of people running towards him. He turned his head quickly and saw that Remus and Tonks were both running towards him. Cursing, Sirius got to his feet, planning on heading back into the store, but stopped when Amelia stepped out, looking thoroughly defeated. "They got him. Rudolphus took him. He had a portkey." Draco shuddered uncontrollably as he beheld the sight before him. He'd been summoned to the dining hall of Malfoy Manor, along with other Death Eaters. He had known there was to be attacks, but he had not been allowed to go along. So, he'd returned to his preparations for the coming year. Voldemort didn't care to hear the reports of that evening's operations. He had only wished to divide the Order and the Ministry's forces. It had succeeded. Before him knelt the frail form of the man who had sold him his wand so many, many years ago. "Mr. Ollivander, I am most privileged to have you before me this evening. I have quite a few questions for you, but it must wait for now." Draco had been spending every waking moment reading every book in the family library. He was also reading up on ways to repair magical items. His new master had instructed him to repair a magical vanishing cabinet which resided within Hogwarts. Lord Voldemort himself had informed him of its existence, and how to get into the room where it resided. According to the Dark Lord, another cabinet was in the possession of that slime ball Borgin in Nocturne Alley. He had been informed to keep it safe, and not sell it, or he would suffer the consequences. He'd also been receiving special instruction from several high-ranking Death Eaters. His mother had started to hover about him. Many times when he'd thought he was alone, he would look up from his books to see her lingering in the doorway, simply watching him. Draco had taken to ignoring it, as whenever he asked what she wanted, she would say nothing, and walk away, only to appear a bit later, just staring. It was most disturbing, but he was now able to shut it out of his mind. He had learned focus, and he could not wait to get back into Hogwarts to show the lesser wizards what he was truly capable of. Now, however, all of his daydreams, and fantasies of revenge, and dominance were washed away by the feeble cries of a broken-down old man, who hung helplessly in the air, spinning for all of the Death Eaters to see. The man who had sold nearly everyone in the room their wands. Ollivander. I am most pleased, Rudolphus. Most pleased. Let it never be said that Lord Voldemort does not reward for success. You shall lead my forces into Hogwarts when young Malfoy has succeeded in his mission. You shall have Neville Longbottom for yourself. Rudolphus Lestrange bowed low before his master, a wicked smile on his sinister face. Malfoy had received tutelage from Lestrange, and though it had been informative, Draco found the man to be disgusting. His flesh crawled whenever the man spoke, and he felt his stomach turn with every syllable. I shall help the boy in any way I can, my lord. I know how important this task to be, though I do not know what it is. Rudolphus said. You will do no such thing. Voldemort hissed. The task is Malloy's alone. Voldemort turned his sinister red eyes to the young scion of the name Malfoy. I trust you have been working hard to prepare for your return to Hogwarts. Draco gulped and nodded. He couldn't understand the power his new master had to make him feel insignificant and weak whenever he stood before his master. Was it just the power the Dark Lord radiated, or was it something else? A curse upon all who carried the mark. He needed to learn it. He wanted to feel the superiority he knew his master must feel. He craved it. It was like a drug. Draco caught his mother's eye from across the room, her eyes glistening in the firelight. It was then that something clicked in his mind. He now knew why she stared at him. She was worried for him. She didn't think he was capable. Anger boiled up in his chest. She thinks I'm soft. She thinks I'm weak. I'll show her. I'll show every one of them. I'm going to do it. I'm going to prove that I'm not to be trifled with. I'm going to kill Albus Dumbledore, and the old coot won't even see it coming. Albus Dumbledore finally returned to his office, well past 2 in the morning. He was very tired. There had been surprisingly few injuries from that night's operations. Dumbledore was never more pleased of his decision to step down as the leader of the Order. His policy of never taking lives had proven to be a great weakness, and had cost the Order dearly in the past. Amelia Bones understood war better than he did, it seemed. By allowing the members of the Order to use whatever means necessary to stop their enemies, so many more lives had been saved. The Ministry was still quite busy, so far as he knew, as many Muggles had seen the battles in Canterbury and York, and the Alleviators had more than a few memories to alter. Unfortunately, Hay had suffered a terrible defeat. Ollivander had been taken, despite their efforts. Amelia was still kicking herself for no having more people in Diagon Alley. They had managed to kill 3 Death Eaters and capture 1 in the end, but that had not been their goal. It was also quite clear they would get nothing from the Death Eater, as she was very young, and was quite likely not given much information. The other 2 operations had gone very well. Moody's group had killed nearly every Death Eater. According to Moody, only one of the Blighters had managed to escape. His group had suffered no casualties, and the worst wound was a scratch suffered by a Raider-frightened cat. Dumbledore was sure that Bill Weasley would not hear the end of that for a while. Kingsley's group had been less successful. It looked as if Ravenclaw House had suffered the loss of one of its star students. The entire Brocklehurst family had been slain only a moment or 2 before the order arrived. Dumbledore's heart broke as he thought of the promising young witch who Professor Flitwick had spoken so highly of this past year. With a great sigh, the headmaster of Hogwarts sat behind his desk, and retrieved an envelope from one of the drawers on his desk. Opening the large envelope, Dumbledore began reviewing the parchment, with a heavy heart. He had been quite busy of late in preparation for what he knew was now inevitable. He had always understood it was just the way of things, and that he was not beyond nature's reach. Yet, knowing that his own end was nearing was a bit disconcerting somehow. Maybe it was that he'd been in this world for so long that he had trouble imagining what it would be like not to experience it any longer. Maybe it was all the regrets he had over all the mistakes he had made in this life. Or maybe, it was that he knew that no matter what, he would not succeed in ending Lord Voldemort's reign of terror. It was going to fall to Harry Potter to do what he, Albus Dumbledore, would not accomplish. Oh, Dumbledore was not about to give up. He fully intended to do all he could to make the burden easier on the boy, but in his heart, Albus knew that he was going to fail in ridding the world of Voldemort's Horcruxes. He still had no way of discovering exactly what the remaining Horcruxes were, and where they might be. He felt he was close to learning the location of one, though he still had many places to look. Harry and his friends were progressing quite well, and Harry would be given serious instruction once school began. Dumbledore had decided to wait until Harry was back at Hogwarts to begin teaching him spell work. It felt it would be easier to hide Harry's advanced education then. However, he was going to start showing him all the information about the Horcruxes in the coming weeks. He was also considering allowing Harry's young friends to see all he'd collected. Perhaps their young eyes might see something he had missed. Fawkes gave a soft trill, and Albus looked up with a faint smile. "Am I doing enough, old friend? Can I do any more?" he asked Thrilling Redbird, who cocked its head in question. Dumbledore smirked, and shook his head slowly. He turned back to the parchment in his hands, and with another great sigh, folded it back up, and slipped it back into the envelope. He would send it to Gringotts in the morning. There was still much to do, and this was only one small detail. At the moment, however, he was quite tired. His bed was calling to him, and he was not going to deny himself a nice peaceful rest. Tomorrow, he would go to the Flamel House, and begin Harry's education about Lord Voldemort. Lord Voldemort sat alone in the room he'd taken for himself in Malfoy Manor. The master's suite was very elegantly decorated, likely by Narcissa herself. The woman had exceptional taste, and was a vision to look upon. Though lately, she no longer looked upon him with the worship she once had. Likely she was worried for her child. Such a waste. Draco was no more gifted than his fool of a father, though, Lucius did have his uses, and the Malfoys were swimming in gold. Voldemort brushed those thoughts aside. He had too many questions which needed answers, all of them surrounding the enigma that was Harry Potter. The boy had proven to be more than lucky. It was as if fate was guiding the boy. No child could be as lucky as Potter appeared to be. The boy managed to escape his clutches so many times. The Dark Lord was now convinced that the prophecy held some kind of truth to it. Perhaps Potter would be the one who would be his end. If only Lucius had gotten the prophecy. Voldemort snarled softly. He shared too much in common with the boy. Their wand cores, for one. How astronomical were the odds that out of every wizard ever born, Potter would be the one destined for the twin to his own wand. They were both orphans, though admittedly, the Dark Lord had been the reason Potter had no parents. Why couldn't the Mudblood Witch simply stand aside? Given all he now understood of the boy, Voldemort was beginning to wonder if fate itself was not trying to intervene with his destiny. Was this nature's way of balancing the world? If so, why not someone more powerful, more capable, than this child? Voldemort pondered this for a few moments. Something had changed in recent weeks. Ever since he had discovered that he shared a mental link with the boy, Voldemort had been monitoring it. However, after what happened at the Ministry when he had tried to possess the boy and had suffered serious agony, he had closed the link, using his occlumency shields. Yet he still managed to feel the link. After that it had been nothing more significant than a buzzing in the back of his great mind. But now, he no longer felt it. Severus had hypothesized that the boy had perhaps managed to employ occlumency against his lord. Voldemort had then asked how that was possible, as Severus had told him that Potter had not been able to even grasp the concepts before. Snape had responded that he was receiving instruction from Dumbledore now. Something else was weighing heavily on the Dark Lord's mind. Ever since he'd been resurrected, something was different. His power, while still immense, was not what it had once been. Before he'd very nearly been destroyed 15 years ago, he'd positively hummed with magic. Yet, now, in this new body, he no longer vibrated with the power he'd so coveted. It had been most noticeable that night he had fought Dumbledore. He should have beaten the old wizard. It should not have lasted as long as it did, nor should it have been so evenly matched. He was the superior wizard, in every way. Yet, Dumbledore had very nearly bested him. Thankfully, the old man still refused to take a life. That had been his etch. Still, the concern lingered. First his noticeable decrease in power, and now, the loss of his connection to Potter. Despite what Snape said, Voldemort knew it was not simply occlumency. Something was wrong, and all the Dark Lord could think of was something had gone wrong in the ritual. It had to be the explanation. Wormtail, as useless as he was, had performed the ritual perfectly. So it had to be something else. Something he had overlooked. Something he had not foreseen. But what could it be? And then the answer came to him. In a moment of utter clarity, the memory of that night came to him. Of the fear no, the uncertainty that everything would go right. Of the waiting in that boiling putrid liquid as he waited for Wormtail to perform his duty. First, the bone from his filthy Muggle father. That one dark secret he held so close to his chest. No one could ever suspect he was less than what he appeared to be. He could never lose the faith of his followers. He'd lied to Wormtail, telling him his father had been a very powerful wizard, but had been too forgiving of muggles, and it had been his undoing. Next came the sacrifice that the Dark Lord was sure Wormtail would be unable to perform, and yet, the coward had done it. He had cut off his own hand for his master. His servant had willing given part of himself to resurrect his lord, and Voldemort had repaid him for his loyalty by providing him a new hand. One which would be able to help him finish what D started with the Potters. The end of those silly marauders. And finally, the blood of his enemy. The blood of Harry Potter. The blood in which ran a very powerful protective charm that had saved the brat many times over. That blood would now protect him now. But now he knew that it wasn't. The very thing he had thought he needed, Potter's blood, which was infused with the protective magic that had nearly destroyed him all those years ago, that was what must be wrong. He had unwittingly doomed himself by using Potter's blood. It must be the answer to his dilemma. Voldemort rose from his chair and began to pace. That had to be it. The ancient magic which Potter's mud-blood mother had invoked to protect the child was very slowly working against him. How could he have not seen this? How could he have not anticipated this? Potter's blood was supposed to strengthen him, and allow him the ability to kill the boy, and now it appeared that it would kill him after all. No, he was not going to let the brat destroy him. He would find the answer to this enigma. Every problem had a resolution. He had gone farther than anyone before him into the mysteries of magic. He would go further still, and become even more powerful than anyone before him. It was his destiny. Please like and subscribe.